Hello everyone. Today we are going to explain what a routing policy is and what policy routing is. Actually, these two names sound very similar to us, as if one puts routing in front and the other puts policy behind, giving the impression that they mean almost the same thing. In reality, their roles in our network are completely different. First, let's talk about what a routing policy is. A routing policy is actually based on our human intentions. It's about constructing a routing table based on human intentions. Any routing device we encounter in the future, whether it's a router, a layer 3 switch, or a firewall, all these routing devices forward based on the routing table. That means I check if it's in my table. If it is, great, I'll help you forward it. If not, then sorry, I can't help you forward it. Now during this process, let's look at this diagram. In the diagram, there are 4 routers. Between R4 and R1, we are using static routing, while between R1 and R3, the OSPF routing protocol is being used. The routing protocols between them are different. So, can R4 learn the routes from R3? Or can R3 learn the route 172, 16.1.2.3.0 from R4? This is not possible. Why do I say this? Suppose in this process, the person in the middle only speaks Chinese, the person on the left only speaks Korean, and the person on the right only speaks French, or let's say R2 and R3 only speak French. Now, in this process, can we understand each other's language? If I only speak this language, then definitely not. So, what if I want to understand each other's language? Wouldn't I need someone in the middle who understands Korean on this side and French on that side? Only then can I act as a translator between the two. In this context, I translate Korean into French and French into Korean, allowing me to facilitate communication in between. In the future, we can implement this on the R1 device, meaning that the learned routes here can be introduced into OSPF, enabling my OSPF neighbors to learn them. Alright, at this point, there's a problem. If I introduce it on R1, what command do I use? Within OSPF 1, in process 1, we use input route static. In this process, we introduce static routes. However, if I introduce static routes, then all 3 static routes will be introduced. But in this case, I have a requirement. I don't want to introduce 3.0. I only want to introduce 1.0 and 2.0. So what should I do at this point? At this point, we actually need to use our introduction structure along with our policy to restrict the introduction. In other words, restrict the type 5 LSA, preventing it from being introduced. Can the routing tables of R and R3 still learn it? They won't be able to learn it. After restricting it, if I don't introduce it here, for example, in the middle, there's a translator, and during translation, he doesn't translate the sentence into French. Can 2 and 3 know that the Korean student just said something else in Korean? They can't understand it, they don't know. This means that in this process, I control the routing to ensure that there are no routes in my routing table. So, are we saying that the routing policy here only controls whether it is added to my routing table? Not just that, it actually involves a lot more, including how I choose and how the route is determined. Modifying these attributes is something that the routing policy can handle. So, how is it executed? Our entire routing policy is actually divided into 3 steps. Through us, we deploy these strategy tools and methods to control our routing entries. The first step is to identify which specific routes I want to modify. In this process, I need to match them first. What method should I use for matching? Generally, in projects, we use ACLs or prefix lists for matching. After identifying them, the remaining ones will be filtered out. Generally, in projects, when we perform filtering, we use router policies. Besides matching in this process, there is another step, which is to apply them. For example, if we set up an event here, it needs to be implemented. Who will implement it? I need to instruct the people below to carry out these tasks. Similarly, when I write this ACL or this router policy, I am merely drafting the protocol. We are just drafting the routing strategy. But I haven't told others to do it. So, where do we usually call upon it? Do we call upon it within the protocol, for example, calling OSPF, ISAS, and other protocols? In this process, through the routing strategy, we essentially control the routing here, whether it's modifying certain things or controlling its table addition or so on. We control whether it is introduced for us. This is all called routing strategy. Why? In this process, we need to use this method to control it. And that is our routing strategy. Besides this, there is also something called policy routing. What is policy routing? Policy routing is actually about controlling our forwarding path. For example, let's take a look at this process now. If in this process I have a device here, and there is also a device here. There is a device here. And what about these devices? We connect them together. In this process, if I connect them together in the future, can I go from 1 to 4? And can I choose to go through 2 or 3? Right? I can go above or below 12. Now, if I want R1 to only go through R to find R4, is this possible? Yes, it is. So what can I do here? I can use static routing or dynamic routing. Besides these, I can also use policy routing. So why do we need policy routing? Isn't it enough to just use the routing we had before? First, if in the future during this process, let's say I'm here, and this is an enterprise's gateway device, which we generally refer to as JW. JW is typically the gateway for our enterprise. Besides this, for example, if I am connecting with 2 service providers here, like us, currently there are 2 major service providers in China, among many others. Here, I won't use China as an example. Here, we'll use ISP1 and ISP2 to represent the 2 service providers. If in the future, during this process, I have 2 service providers, then aside from these 2 within our company, we also have different types of operations. For instance, in this process, I have a network segment here and another network segment there. I use 2 computers here to represent different network segments. Alright, if during this process these are all our company's operations, then in the future, if I have services from 2 providers, can I use both at the same time? Or can I choose to use just one? Right? This all depends on your needs and preferences. Now, if I have a service from just one provider, let's say I only have one, I choose different exits. For example, if I subscribe to 2 Chinese telecom broadband services, I usually load balance, meaning I might use both sides. But if it's 2 different providers, like having services from 2 different providers, in my own country, generally, I would choose one as the primary and the other as a backup. Why do we choose a primary and a backup in this case? Because the equipment used by different providers is definitely not the same. Some of your internal equipment will certainly be different. So generally, in the case of 2 providers, we set up a primary and a backup. So how do we set up a primary and a backup? Regarding the main route, if I finish it, then normally if the traffic is on the main route, I only take the main route, and the other one I just wait. So it's a waste of money. Only if there's a problem with the main route, then I will use both. In this process, if we find the entire business traffic too wasteful, what can we do here? Can we use different service providers for different business operations? How do we differentiate them? If the destination IP is different, I can use static routing. For example, if I'm accessing this above, 8.8 business, and below, during this process, I am accessing 9.9 business, okay? Now, during this process, in the future when we write static addresses, we can write ePruth static here, which is a format for static routing. Then, following that, we add our 8.8, which corresponds to the next hop location under the destination. For example, in this case, I use ISP1 to direct it towards 8.8. Then the next hop would be to write this interface, if I want it to go to 9999 through here. In this case, can I specify iProot statically during this process? Now here we have 9.9. Then it's wildcard and our next hop. For example, pointing to the opposite side's ISP2, which is 12.2. Well, 1.1, 2. Yeah, okay. Now, in this process, we can make such a distinction. However, the vast majority of businesses in the world don't operate like this. Based on the destination IP, I can distinguish you. For example, my network segment 1, I am sending out service A in network segment 2. I am sending out service B, and now I require that service A. Service A goes through carrier 1, while service B goes through carrier 2, right? So what should be done? I can say that within this, I can intervene so that different services take different paths, the paths. Previously, we had no way to intervene in all the routing. So here we need to use policy-based routing, PBR. What does that mean? For example, if everyone joins a tour group in the future, we will definitely create a plan based on the majority of the tourists. After the travel strategy is set, we recommend it to everyone. But now, for example, if a VIP user comes along who is very wealthy and wants to see some different scenery, then wouldn't you create a special itinerary just for him? Does he still need to see the regular routes? No, he doesn't. So in this case, if in the future I use this PBR to detect it, what is your original address like? Okay, based on your situation, I will assign you a different route. Okay, if I don't find anything in my own list here, hello, then you are like everyone else. You will forward according to this routing table. As we mentioned before, whether it's OSPF, easy, or our static routes. What it actually looks at is your destination. It looks at your destination IP, where you want to go, and what the next hop is. Do I care? Where you come from? I don't care. However, our policy routing here is based on the original, to forward, and here we do not forward based on the destination. To put it simply, it's like choosing dishes, based on the person. In other words, I have different attitudes towards different people. This is what our policy routing is about. In this process, why do I definitely need policy routing? First of all, the routing policy we mentioned earlier is on the router. We need to run this routing protocol during the routing protocol process. We use certain tools to modify the routing policy. For example, our router policy. To achieve defining this routing table for you, I determine whether your routing table has it or not. If you don't recognize a place, of course, you can't go there. However, in the end, all packets will still be based on this routing table to perform forwarding. Now, in this process, does it intervene and affect the routing table, or does it listen to the routing table for forwarding? However, within this, my policy routing is through defining a policy. I make this traffic packet execute through this policy. We have data forwarding, but only if the policy exists. However, is there any involvement of routing protocols in this process? No. When this traffic packet is forwarded through my device, I don't look at my routing table. I only check if you belong to this VIP list. If you are, then I will give you. I will assign you this path that is particularly suitable for you. Right, for example, in this context, PCR. Hey, he also came over, right? But when he looked, oh no, you're not in this VIP user list. Okay, so now in this process, hey, I'll just follow the general route for you. For example, you go above. So in this context, he can define different types of traffic, go to different places. This is where our routing strategy and policy routing are completely different from each other. In the future, when everyone goes to understand and learn, they must also distinguish clearly. And don't let its name cause problems. And when we use it, if it's a routing strategy generally, we call it router policy. If it's policy routing, we generally call it PBR. This is a small difference in their names if everyone wants to learn Huawei certification technology or want to obtain Huawei certification question bank. Please send me a private message or leave more comments below the video for technical exchanges. That's all for today. In the future, if you're interested in how to configure routing strategies or policy routing, you can send me a private message.